You are standing at the foot of a stair of old stone. The air tastes of iron and damp. Above you, the door that should have led to a throne is shut, bolted, and in the room beyond, two boys are meant to be waiting for a coronet they will never wear. Who took them? That is the question that will not stop gathering around the Tower of London. Who took England's heirs? The year is 1483. Edward IV has just died. He was a soldier, king who returned from exile and stitched a kingdom back together by force and marriage. He leaves a son only 12 years old, a boy who has been king on papers and in prayers, but not yet in power. The court is raw with ambition and fear. The Dowager Queen, Elizabeth Woodville, wants to keep her children safe. Men who long served Edward are closing their hands on offices and land while others smell an opening. Into that room of anxious, nervous men steps Richard, Duke of Gloucester, uncle to the boys, brother to the dead king, a man who is lean, hard-eyed, and in those months moves with the certainty of someone who has already decided how the story will end. We know the outline. We do not know the hand that filled in the details. The official acts are plain enough. Richard takes custody of the boys on some pretext of protection and preparation for the ceremony of coronation. He secures the loyalty of certain nobles. He displaces others. In a few swift blows, arrests. A sudden execution you read about and want to ask too many questions about. The network that might protect the children phrase. Then, not long after, the princes vanish. The record goes silent. If you ask the hard question, did Richard order their deaths? You are asking more than about motive. You are asking about certainty, about evidence, and about the shape of narrative, what gets remembered, who writes it, and why a boy's absence becomes a nation's accusation. To follow this like a detective, we will move slowly, deliberately. We will stand over the documents like bodies of evidence. We will test motives and chances. We will look at what contemporaries saw, then at how later hands wrote the story, and finally at the odd, modern twist where bones, a car park, and DNA almost collide to solve it, before being held back by walls of ceremony and reverence. Start with the day Edward IV died and the clock that followed. He dies in April, the court is unsettled. A succession appears on paper, Edward, his eldest son, is king. But a king is only as safe as the men who guard him and the calendars that get him crowned. Coronations take months, and guardianship during that time is everything. The boy is taken to the Tower, not as a goal in the everyday sense, but as the royal lodging. The Tower is both palace and prison, a place where kings sleep and where men are sometimes killed. You can still smell that double life in the stones. Wax, smoke, leather, and the faint, wrong smell of iron that hangs in places where men have left their blood. Richard arrives as protector. He is not a neutral uncle. His claim to the crown will soon be built into law, but first comes the fact of power. He controls the state apparatus, the royal household, the troops in London. He moves quickly. On one day, a trusted counsellor is executed, an event that contemporaries did not forget. Men are arrested. A parliament will later pass what is called the Titulus Regis, a legal document arguing, in short, that Edward I's marriage was invalid, and therefore his children were illegitimate. If that document is right, Richard's claim is clean. If it's wrong, the story is something else entirely. A seizure of power with law after the fact. Contemporaries differ in tone and detail. There are reports from visitors and clerks and chroniclers. Dominic Mancini, an Italian who came to London just then, wrote a short account. He had an eye for the unfamiliar, the way English nobles moved, the rumour, the suddenness of the judicial violence. Mancini describes a sense that Richard acted like a man who feared conspiracies on every hand. He reports that the Woodvilles, the Queen's family, were seen as dangerous to the state's peace. Mancini's view is not neutral. He is a foreigner translating a messy court to an audience abroad, but his is one of the earliest voices we have, and it smells like the place, suspicion, rumor, and a certain swift, efficient cruelty. Then there are the chronicles, not a single book, but a bundle of narratives recorded by monks, and clerks who write days after the events, with loyalties that shade their pens. Some describe the boys as hidden away, removed from public light. Others hint at darker things. Whispers that officers found evidence of foul play, that the stair had blood, that the cries of children were stifled. But remember, a whisper recorded is not the same as a hand in the dark. Words move through courts like smoke. By the time they reach a chronicler, they are shaped by politics, and by the story the writer thinks will serve the next ruler. We owe a significant part of the story's darkness to the Tudors. Henry Tudor invades in 1485, defeats Richard at Bosworth, becomes Henry V, and crowns himself in an act that needs explanation. The new king's legitimacy benefits from casting Richard as the villain who killed heirs to his throne. The Tudors found a profitable story: make Richard the usurper and murderer, and your own rise looks like a rescue. Over the coming decades, historians and poets shape that story. Thomas More writes a dramatic, intimate account. His version, composed under Henry V's line, describes a cold night, a murder in the Tower, a confession from Sir James Terrell, a man who purportedly admitted the deed, and the place where the boys were smothered and buried. It makes a neat, terrible narrative. It also arrives decades after the facts, and in a political climate eager to vilify Richard. So we have two colliding things: contemporaries who smell wrongness and later writers who build the shape of the wrong into a story of deliberate murder. Which is the truth? A historian's careful hand must warn you accounts vary, but the pattern of motive and opportunity is clear enough to chill. Richard had custody. He had the most to gain from the boys being declared illegitimate or simply gone. He had reasons to remove them. A direct line of royal blood that could replace him if law or fear swung back. He also had the means: the lock of the tower door, the men who acted on his orders, the speed with which he consolidated power. Motive and means sit in the same room. Yet motive and means are not proof. A dozen other hands might have been on those levers. The Duke of Buckingham was a man with his own ambition. So were the Woodville factions, who had been losing ground and might have taken desperate steps. Henry Tudor had motive later, but not the access at the time. There are even theories, hold this as a possibility, that the boys were spirited out of London, perhaps hidden by those who wanted to use them as political leverage later. That idea flickers into life because, decades after the disappearance, a young man in Europe and then in Cork stands up claiming to be one of the missing princes. He is Perkin Warbeck, and for a while he draws followers and even foreign support. He is almost certainly an imposter, almost certainly a convenient tool for enemies of Henry V. Yet his claim reveals something important: the fact that people wanted to believe the princes were alive. Belief is not proof, but it is a small window into the human need to refuse certain violences. We come to a turning point, a discovery centuries after the boys disappeared, a physical piece of the puzzle. Imagine it with me. You are a mason in 1674, the White Tower under repair. The sky is pale, the day smells of lime and dust. You are prying up the boards under a staircase when your trowel strikes bone. The discovery is not cinematic so much as terrible in its smallness: a jaw, some teeth, a thin femur. 2 skulls, 2 children's bones, wrapped or thrown into a pit. The men call up the officials. A rumor that will not die is suddenly a thing. The bones are removed, viewed by clerics and antiquaries, and soon a small funeral is arranged. The bones are carried through Westminster and buried in a grand, public place with an inscription that names them as the 2 sons of Edward A.V. That small grave in the abbey becomes part of the evidence. To many people then, and to many since, it should seal the matter. 2 boys' bones, found in the tower, buried as the princes. What more do you need? But the legalist in us asks, what more do you need to connect bones to a murderer? The bones confirm only death, not the hand that caused it. If you put yourself in the shoes of a modern investigator, you will want to do what science now allows. In 2012, something odd and new happened that changed the whole calculus. An archaeological dig under a Leicester car park found a skeleton. It was a man with a battle-hardened spine, a curved back, a skull with a blow at the foramen magnum that suggested a violent death. The scientists did what good investigators do: they compared DNA. A DNA from the skeleton matched living relatives of the Plantagenets through the female line, and a rich tapestry of genealogical and documentary cross checking confirmed the identity. This was Richard Eyre. Suddenly, a tool existed that could, in theory, test the bones in Westminster. If the two small skeletons were the princes, their DNA should match Richard's by cousinship along bloodlines. If the Abbey's bones belonged to someone else, science could say so. Many scholars and some descendants asked for testing. The request was not a demand for spectacle. It was a quiet attempt to move beyond the fog of centuries by using the evidence we now have. To here is where bureaucracy and reverence come into the room. Westminster Abbey declined. The bones in the urn were, in their view, in a consecrated place and part of a memorial tradition. The Abbey worried about the dignity of exhuming and sampling remains, about the precedent it would set, and about the disturbance of graves of the dead. The decision stopped, for now, what some people felt was the last way forward. We had the man who could be the link, the machine to test the link, and yet the church's walls held firm. Ask yourself, would you want to cut open a child's grave to answer a historical question? There is no simple right answer. It is easy to be forensic and hard to be reverent. The choice to leave the bones untested is a kind of answer itself. It says something about our relationship to the past, that some mysteries we would rather keep sealed. Even without this one scientific check, there is a knot of reason that pulls most historians toward one conclusion. The balance of documentary material, the motive, the opportunity, and the political pattern of the moment all point to Richard as likely the architect of the boy's disappearance. He benefits more than anyone else. He had the custody. The elimination of Heirs was a brutal, but not unheard of route to securing a crown. The timing of seizures, arrests, and the passing of titulus regis fit a pattern of someone preparing to hold power indefinitely. Yet there are problems. The official confession Thomas More reports Sir James Terrell's came about under a different regime. Records of trials and admissions are spotty and sometimes shaped by victor's justice. Tyrrell's supposed confession is not backed by contemporary judicial papers. The exact place where the boys were buried is not described with the kind of precision that would let us dig with a spade and find a box. We have a pair of children's bones from a later century, but the chain of custody between the site of burial and the urn is not iron-clad. There are other questions that complicate a neat verdict. If Richard did order them killed, when and how? There are versions suggesting a single night, a pair of servants, a blade smothering, perhaps even a hired hand. There are also versions where the boys lingered longer, their death more a slow erasure than a definite blow. The stories differ because memory prefers a neat end, real lives often do not grant one. And then there are the political aftershocks. Henry V, who beat Richard, married Elizabeth of York, the prince's sister. By marrying into the same family, he stitched the York and Lancastrian claims into a single line. Did that act of union also bury inconvenient questions? It certainly calmed some dangerous loyalties. Henry V's need for stability may explain why the killers, if there were killers, were not fully and definitively prosecuted. The Tudor state folded the story under itself and moved on. For a nation that wanted peace after decades of war, forgetting could be a strategy. Sense the human faces in this. The boys were children. Edward, older, is a name on paper to rulers, but a boy in a bedroom to his nurse, his hair sticking, his language clumsy with youth. You can see him, if you try hard, reaching for a toy, bored with the ceremony, afraid of men whose faces are too serious. The younger brother, Richard of York, maybe less than 10, looks to adults for confidence and does not find it. This is the part that gives me pause every time to talk of kingship and legal claims and titularly is to abstract lives into instruments. The more you learn, the more you feel the small human calculus, fear, confusion, a child's craving for one steady hand. People have tried over and over to stitch this back together in fresh ways. In the 20th century, and especially in the 21st, historians have been less willing to accept Tudor propaganda at face value. Revisionists point out that Richard's legal moves had graces of a man who believed his claim, not simply a murderer trying to cloak cowardice in law. Some historians are prepared to say we do not know. Others, reading the pattern of violence and the convenience of deaths, say probably Richard. That almost certainty is not a shout. It is a cautious weighing. Even if we accept that Richard likely ordered the deaths, we are left with the human question, does certainty about the order give us closure? It gives a story, yes, it does not bring the boys back. The story of kings and crowns is a large thing, but its edges are carved on a child's throat and the memory of a nurse who never stopped hoping. And yet, history's appetite for proof is not a bad thing. The discovery of Richard's skeleton in Gloucester opened a possibility to test family ties. DNA can sometimes answer lineage questions with a clarity that words cannot. It could have told us whether the bones in Westminster were close kin to Richard. It might have confirmed that two boys found under a stair were indeed the princes. It would still not hand us a name of a murderer, but it would cut away some of the fog. That chance exists as a what-if. The bones in Westminster remain where they were placed in 1674, wrapped in respect and in dispute. The Abbey's refusal to allow testing leaves the question a stubborn ember in a hearth of iron law and religious feeling. It is an ember that will flare whenever someone argues that science should be allowed to unbolt history. There are arguments on both sides worth hearing. To exhume is to learn. To keep the grave sealed is to honor a ritual that gives the nation a certain kind of peace. Think about the shape of the Palace of Westminster and the tower itself. They are buildings that hold many voices. Some of those voices are gone forever. Some, like the question of the prince's death, will not be satisfied by a single answer. We live in a time when we can sometimes prod the past to tell us a truth with the help of bone chemistry and genomes. We also live in a time when we choose not to. If you look back over the centuries, you see story after story piled on top of the facts. Tudor writers polished the narrative into a moral parable. The usurper killed the children and lost. Victorian novelists read it as drama. Modern historians read it as a case study of power, law, and the politics of memory. At every turn the story has been used as warning, as justification, as drama. And that use has shaped the record. So what do we conclude after looking at the documents, the bones, the political motives, and the mess of human feeling? The most honest, least theatrical answer is the one that refuses the tidy certainty of a court case and acknowledges the weight of probability. The boys almost certainly died while in Tower custody. The most likely political architect of that silence is the man who had the most to gain and who took the most decisive steps in those weeks. Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Many historians will say the same. Some will say there is reasonable doubt. The bones in Westminster, discovered nearly 2 centuries later, give physical proof of a tragedy but not of responsibility. The only definitive scientific test that might tie the remains directly to the Plantagenet line. DNA comparison with Richard I was possible for a time and then set aside, left to be a future curiosity rather than an immediate tool. That is the unresolved part that keeps the story alive, not the murk of motives alone, but the fact that somewhere beneath a stair or under the white stone of the Abbey, there are choices we have refused to make for reasons of respect, tradition, or caution. We could choose to dig, to test, to finally pair bone and name. We could also choose to leave the bones where they were placed, a memorial rather than a piece of evidence. Neither choice is neutral. Each carries an ethical weight. Histories of power teach us that certainty often hides violence. They also teach us that uncertainty can be a form of reverence. The princes in the Tower are both a crime and a symbol. They are proof of how delicate a child's life is when folded into the larger machinery of state. They are proof of how stories get built and rebuilt to suit rulers and readers. I do not end this with a courtroom verdict. I end with the image of two small shoes left in a small, high room of a place that is both palace and prison. Picture them as you leave the tower, tiny leather cups, worn by the scuffs of a child's world. They are not political instruments. They are things a hand could put off for a moment. The question that follows, more than who killed them, more than whether the bones match a king, is this: what else in history have we buried because it was inconvenient or because we were afraid to look? Some things are gone from the record forever. Other things lie under stone, waiting to be asked about one last time. Which of those wait is the question you are holding as you walk away from the tower, the stones cool under your hand.